Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our panel discussion. I'll introduce myself and then my two panelists. My name is Laura Tarantini-Amor. I've been in education in this country for 24 years. I have a background in SEND and EAL, so for some of us that means I work with bilingual children, and I now consult for one of the largest federations in the nation, the 5th largest trust of schools called Harris Federation. I'm also a SENCO and a specialist assessor, so lots of strings to my bow. And let me introduce Simon. Yes? Simon, what do you do?
So my name is Simon Hunt. I'm a primary school teacher. I teach a mixed year 3-4 class at a school called Tottington Primary. We're an inclusive primary school with for a unit with children with physical disabilities. I've been teaching for 40, do you know when you have to figure out how many classes? It's 14 years now. I was in class on Monday. I'm going to be in class next Monday, back in school. I have to check in with my children later on today to tell them what I've been up to because they're always interested of all the things I get up to. I've also written a couple of books about bogies and bottom burps, which are really deep and meaningful books about bogies and bottom burps. But yeah, my main passion is teaching. I love being a primary school teacher. It's the best job in the world, I feel.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And our other panelist, Thomas.
Thank you very much. Is this on? Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I hope you're well. My name's Thomas Blakemore, and I'm a primary school teacher. I have been a primary school teacher for 8 years. I did 2 years teaching in the UK, and then I moved internationally to teach in the UAE for 6 years. I've recently moved back to the UK, so really interested to sort of see what UK education is like after such a long time away. In my spare time, not that you get much as a teacher, I am a content creator on platforms such as YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and hopefully able to create some supportive content to help teachers in a range of different topics such as EdTech and AI. I know that's the big buzzword at the moment and it can be a bit overwhelming, but that's the different areas of passion that I have. So thank you. If you want to take a seat, there are seats around. Feel free to do that.
Thank you. All right, we're going to start with our first question, which is to Simon. So you work in a mainstream primary school with students who have diverse SEND needs. How do you ensure that your classroom is accessible and inclusive to all your students?
All right. So one of the first things I do is I design my classroom around the children I'm going to get. I look at pictures and videos of my old classroom years ago, and I used to have bright pictures because I like bright pictures and things all over my classroom, but actually it's not conducive for the children that I get. Now I look at the needs of the children that I receive, have a look what needs we have, and I base my design around the children that I get around that's the classroom. So we have, as the children come in the morning, we have nice, quiet, relaxing music to calm the children. We have dim lights, we have check-ins, we have visual timetables for the children that need visual timetables. Nice. And for me, the environment, so when they step into the classroom, that environment, that learning environment, I want it to be conducive and ready to learn for all children in class.
Wonderful. That sounds absolutely fantastic. And in terms of Thomas, you work both in the UK and internationally. How does inclusivity in education differ in various settings? And what key insights have you gained from those experiences?
So I find it really interesting in the UAE how the inclusivity is still there, but they are a lot more specific in terms of departments that are available. So it's the parents who pay for the support for the children, which is an interesting one. If the children need one-to-one support, then the parents will fund that. But in terms of support as a teacher, I was really lucky to have a different supportive areas, so inclusion units, where we would have LSAs or learning support assistants who I could utilize to run all sorts of different things like interventions. I know in the UK, I did sometimes find some things challenging in regards to inclusion support. But even in the UK, it was able to utilize the support that was available to help the class. But it was really interesting in the UAE to sort of see what was available in terms of additional support from those units.
So, having taught in both the UK and Dubai, how has cultural differences shaped your understanding of inclusivity in the classroom? So you talked about some challenges. Those challenges are very different. The parents are actually funding the provision. What sort of challenges were those?
Sensitivity around cultural differences. So there are some cultures where if we say there are some challenges and we need to assess those sorts of things, there is some friction. So having that cultural awareness and talking about how additional needs is a universal language and a universal topic that we need to support, not just identifying needs and saying there's a problem, but there is problems here, there's challenges that we might face, being sensitive to those cultural needs, because there's a barrier that comes up sometimes. If you say, okay, we've noticed some challenges, that barrier comes up and it's really hard then to go past that barrier of, okay, we might need some further assessment. That can be a bit of a challenge. But I learned over time that utilizing the departments that were available could really help, having those meetings so that we could create a whole kind of care plan around a child. And once they knew those things were available, then they start to warm to things rather than just having that barrier.
That's interesting. I mean, we have a very different view of inclusivity here in the UK, and actually, as I'm an American, also a very different view there. So we're going to look at the moment, we're going to look at what teachers can do in the classroom. We're going to look at perhaps quick wins for SEND and EAL children. And just to say that EAL means English as an additional language. That terminology was changed probably about 10 years ago or so, because they realized that many of our bilingual children were not just learning one language as an additional language, but also often spoke more than one language at home and their families and in other spheres, and that English was one of the many languages they were adding. So in terms of EAL, the way teachers are being trained and the way the theories were being shaped became quite different, because then it became about not just how you learn English, but how the brain acquires language. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that later on. So, Simon, in your classroom, how do you approach teaching students with EAL or SEND? And could you share a quick win or strategy that has worked particularly well?
So every morning when the children come into school, we have check-ins. So I think that's one of the most important things for me as a teacher, because that quick 2 minutes, that high five, that handshake, that smile, you get an understanding of where the children's that day. So because of the nature of our school, sometimes we could be the first person that smiled or talked to them. We could also find out that maybe they haven't had breakfast that day, and that's something we need to look into. So those relationships, those solid foundation relationships, is all about relationships. And I believe that you can push the academic side of it, which is great, but if you focus on the relationships first, this academic side I promise it will be better than if you just focus completely on the academic side. And it's all about relationships. I know you agree, because we've spoken about this before. But yeah, it's all about relationships. And just that quick check-in, you could find out something that, unless you had a quick word with that child, it could affect the rest of their day. But by just that little check-in, that little chat in the morning, you maybe know something that I might need to change something. Actually, they might not be working too hard today, or they might struggle today, but there's a reason for it. Let's work around the child. So it's all about the child and those relationships.
That's sort of interesting, because I think it talks to the fact that children are resilient, and that how you start your day isn't necessarily how you begin your day, but that acknowledgement is really important in terms of setting up their brains to then be actually be able to learn. Did you find that in the UAE? That kind of acknowledgement, that kind of well-being approach helped the children to learn as the day went on?
100%. I think nowadays relationships is the most important thing in terms of supporting children, whether it's additional needs or otherwise. Having those check-ins would be a key part of, in the UAE, you get that 10-minute slot in the morning where you have that ability to check in with the children, see how things are going, and set systems up to support with that. What would also work quite nicely is if there are children who are perhaps having those distressing circumstances, challenges, it's not always just immediately jumping into technology. It's then seeing what buddies are available. If children have come from other countries, so EAL children, you might not have someone in the classroom with you who speaks that language. However, you will have people in that year group who perhaps are able to make that child feel a little bit more comfortable. So if they're having those challenges and they're struggling to settle into a new country, new school, new area, they're able to talk to that person and become that designated buddy. And they're able to talk about some of those challenges. And that person can then feed that information back to you in a way that perhaps you will not be able to if you talk to them in person.
I think that's something that schools forget about children who have English as an additional language, that really well-being sits within the home language. So the ability to talk about your feelings, the ability to say what your needs are, and those might be basic needs, like I'm thirsty, I'm hungry, I need to go to the toilet, I don't know where that is, how does that work in the school, all work best in the home language. And that relaxes the child and lets them then take on the academic language in English. So, Thomas, you create content around ed tech, right? How do you think technology can help make lessons more inclusive, especially for the sorts of children that we're talking about?
Okay, so there's all sorts of tools that are available now to support children with additional needs at EAL. I think, like you said, one of the most important things to start off with is to utilize tools where you can create dual-coded resources. So it might be something like Widget. Widget allows you to create very quick resources where you can have, whether it's a picture of a toilet, and you've got language, toilet, language in their home language. And you can create packs to support those children. If you know their specific language, you can then create those packs that are available. There are, of course, resource websites where those packs are available. But then outside of that, we're thinking about other technology. I know that my viewboard also has the immersive reader in, and I think that immersive reader is phenomenal.
Yeah, immersive reader.
Yeah, phenomenal tool in terms of being able to, okay, we've got this comprehension, and I know that that comprehension is going to go straight over the child's head. But what I can do is on the side, just kind of take them to the side. This is also available in another language. Not only will it do that, it will also read out that thing to the children, and you can tap on specific words. So if it's, I don't know, going back to toilet, tap on toilet, and that picture will pop, okay, right, I understand what that thing is now. And that's built in, and it's really nice that those accessible tools are available there too.
Simon, immersive reader. We both love immersive reader.
We do. And do you know what? I followed Thomas on YouTube and on your socials for quite a while now. So I met you yesterday for the first time in person. But I've used some of the things but I've used some of the things that you've mentioned before, and I've told teachers. And I think as teachers, it's sometimes knowing these things are there. There'll be people walking around today that could use immersive reader now, but maybe know how to use it. I've never seen but it is, and you've used it before. It's a very, very powerful tool. It's kind of like if children don't understand the meaning of the word, how can they comprehend something? It's like if you've never tasted chocolate, you can read a paragraph about what chocolate is, and unless you taste chocolate and understand what chocolate tastes like, you're not going to understand it. The same with words and language and comprehension. You need to comprehend what that word means before you can understand the comprehension. Now I'm just thinking about chocolate now, actually.
I think what's nice as well is what we're starting to see is extensions of those tools come available now. So I was walking around some of the stores yesterday, and I saw that Reading Coach is coming in. So what Reading Coach allows you to do is to see a piece of text, and as children are reading, it uses that whole AI sphere, and it understands how children are reading, breaks down what some of the mistakes are, and gives the teacher and the child some focus words for them to understand. And then you can kind of tap onto those words with the pictures and help understand those a little bit further too. So that's free as well, which is also awesome.
So just another word about immersive reader. The brain does have concepts. The brain works in concepts. And the problem that children have, both who have speech and language needs, for example, sometimes autism, but sometimes English as additional language, means that they have that concept in mind, but they don't necessarily have the language to hang on the concept. The way that children acquire language best is when you give them the concept first and then you tell them what it is. And that's because you're going over the barrier of language. If the children can't get meaning out of word, they can get it out of a visual. So immersive reader, in terms of giving you pictures of nouns and things that they can't get out of text, is fantastic because kids know what it is that you're talking about. They know what you're referencing, and then you give them the language for that. And that's super important because what you don't want to have children do is lose their home language. You want to be able to, create balanced bilinguals where both sides of the brain, as it were, are working, where they know words in English and they also know their home language. That's where the cognitive benefits of being bilingual comes from. The same thing for speech and language kids. Concept first, language second. So immersive reader, absolutely fantastic. Okay, so to Simon, you use ViewSonic screens in your classroom. Can you explain how that technology, specifically we just talked about immersive reader. Is there anything else that you use which helps to support your leaders with?
So there's two main other tools that we use. So we use immersive reader, which is inbuilt into the software. We also use, and if you have my viewboard, there's a little microphone at the bottom. You tap that as you speak, the words come across. So we have children that struggle with hearing as well as visual impairments. So by speaking, my words go out. This sometimes miscatches my really strong northern accent, but we have a bit of fun with that. But yeah, we have the text that goes across. What's really nice is when we have children coming up and sharing work, my children are year 3, they have very small voices. But when they stand next to the board, when they're speaking, the microphone catches their words. So if you're at the back of the classroom and you can't say, "Hey, Tilly," at the front of the classroom, you can see her words going across. But also because of the confidence for the children knowing that the words go across the top, they then start speaking louder because they know they're not, it's strange to see, but they're kind of projecting the voice naturally now because they're not worried that people can't hear them, but then they automatically start talking louder because they know that people can see what's being said. It's a really powerful tool as well. We also have, I have like a microphone that taps into my screen. So we have a pass around microphone that comes through the screen.
I totally want to be in your class.
Honestly, we have karaoke on Friday as well sometimes, which is really great. But,
on Friday.
and I have a little drop-down microphone as well. So as a teacher, I mean, we're here now in a busy debate. So if you've ever been in a classroom teaching art, it's about as loud as this, I'd say. And if I was a teacher or a child and I was just talking like this, you wouldn't be able to hear.
Yeah.
So we use a microphone to project the voice because for children, I think it's something like 25% of conversations we miss as adults, but we have a part of the brain that's developed after the age of 16 that fills in those missing blanks. But children don't have that part of that brain fully developed. So technically, you could have children that miss a quarter of your lesson just because they can't hear you properly. It's just it's something I delve deep into, and it's been really nice. And then it's good to have a sing-song. And you'd be great at, because Laura's a singer as well, actually. You'd be great in our sing-songs on Friday. We should invite you down.
Well, I used to do karaoke in Spanish with my GCSE students.
The bilingual karaoke is perfect.
That was a lot of fun. Okay, so Thomas, from your experience, what are some of the common challenges that teachers face when supporting students with EAL and SEND, and how can they overcome them in a way that's both practical and effective?
I think time, to a degree too. Time is one of the things that teachers are struggling with, teachers are time poor, and time is precious. So then really trying to get to know that child is something that we really prioritize. And then of course, finding that time to create those resources that are there for the children can be a little bit time consuming and challenging too, but incredibly important. So nowadays we do start to see more things such as AI available that can support teachers with whether it's that dual coded language that we spoke about before, or whether it's helping them understand language a little bit more too. So I know we speak quite frequently about things like ChatGPT, but it is something that's available to support teachers with understanding specific needs, giving ideas on how to create and support them specifically. And it kind of breaks down some of that mental barrier, because a lot of times if you've got no time and you've got that kind of exhausted or something along those lines, using something along those lines to support you with breaking down those barriers is interesting too.
I don't know, do people know what dual coding is? Do you want to explain dual coding a little bit for us?
Dual coding. So, we'll go for it. Dual coding is where you'll probably explain this a little bit better, but my definition is where you've got two languages and it will be an image as well to support with understanding what that language is. In my experience, the way we use this is just simply help children understand specific words. So how that coding comes together with their home language, the language that's used in the classroom, and then an image to support with that. So we would use this in a primary school setting by having, whether it's specific days, weather, things that they want to say, like specific things like we were saying. They might struggle to communicate that they want to go to have some food. Having those things available through that dual coding is useful. You probably do a better job of elaborating that.
Well, you're talking about bilingual dual coding, which is interesting. So as a secondary school teacher, someone who's been a secondary school teacher for 23 years or so, dual coding started out in modern foreign language classrooms where you were trying to work in the target language and had to show children what the actual task was about. So if you wanted a writing task, you had a picture, a pencil, etc. That became the basis for dual coding. And one of the things that I used to tell teachers was that across, it's not just in MFL classes, but at some point the child needs to get the idea about the types of tasks that you do across the school day, across each classroom. So to be able to use a set of dual coding icons across an entire department or across the school is fantastic, because that child is learning across 15 curriculum subjects what that particular symbol means. There is a wonderful, wonderful resource called the Noun Project. And the Noun Project does black and white icons for just about everything that you can imagine. Because one of the things that teachers used to complain about is, well, it's an abstract concept. How am I supposed to put together a picture for an abstract concept? It's a lot better when you're doing tasks, like write it, look it up in the dictionary, read, speak. discuss, etc. But if you're talking about justice, if you're talking about peace, if you're talking about air, like how do you put together icons for that? Well, the Noun Project has had a design project for years and years and years, and they've got literally millions of icons. I suggest that. So that's really interesting. A question actually for all of us, bringing in the new context for SEND that's happening. There's been a huge rise in education healthcare plans being issued across the country. From 2014 to 2024, there's been 140 to 150% increase in EHCPs. A lot of those, actually the majority of those nationally, have been diagnoses in autism. And the other part, the kids who have not gotten EHCPs have diagnoses in speech and language needs, which is interesting because those two things are connected. So how can teachers ensure that we're meeting these increased needs? First of all, we probably want to talk about why we think that there might be an increase, but certainly as teachers, whether or not we know why there's an increase. They're now in our classrooms. They're now in our classrooms in greater numbers. It's no longer just the 15%. A lot of classrooms are higher than that, isn't it? What's the percentage of SEND in some of your classrooms, for example?
So it's 30% in my class.
30%?
Yeah, and if you think my class are year 3, 4, so they're the COVID year.
Yeah.
So when they were in reception, that's when COVID hit. So it's those social interactions for those children and just not being in school for, year 3 and year 4, they've spent 2 years in and out of school. So they've spent a huge proportion of their lives in and out of school, and they're doing needs there as well. It just manifested while they were at home. So, and I think with the EHC part, literally last Friday, I was sat with a parent trying to explain how to fill it in, thinking, how the hell are you supposed to fill these forms in?
Yeah.
They are so difficult. And you go across Borough, and we're in Borough Council. It's completely different to Bolton. It's completely different to Lancashire. I really feel that there should be just a nationalised, simple system to follow.
Yeah.
Because it's those parents. There'll be lots of children that need a EHC plan who parents just gave up.
Yeah.
And honestly, I get it, because I nearly give up myself trying to figure out all these acronyms like EAL. Who wouldn't know what that means? And it's so difficult. And I just learned something of what you said before about the name change 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So I'm constantly learning about acronyms and words and education, and I'm a teacher.
Yeah.
So how the hell are people that work from home and different jobs and busy lives and trying to support their children supposed to understand these really complex? It's a bit of a bugbear of mine, because I literally did it Friday after school, and I was like, I get it, but we're going to do this together, because we need to go through this, because it takes ages, it takes years, it's such a backlog.
Well, it takes about 25 working hours for a SENCO to fill in one EHCP application.
Crazy.
So, 10 years ago, we were talking about 11%. You're talking about maybe 10% of your kids. So you're talking about in a class of 30, you had maybe 3 children who had a diagnosed need or a need that the school was aware of. Now you're talking about your classroom's 30%. I've been in classrooms that are about 35 to 40% with a diagnosed, recognized special educational need of some sort. In the classrooms that you've been in,
it was 25% last year, but undiagnosed needs is also something that we don't see
undiagnosed
too.
because things are so difficult to get through a diagnostic pathway, because the paperwork is absolutely extraordinary. Absolutely. So in terms of that, we're no longer, when we talk about inclusivity, one of the reasons I think we probably all wanted to do this talk is because we're no longer talking about a sideshow.
It's very mainstream.
We're not talking about the veg along with the meat and potato. We are talking about the main meal here. So in terms of using tools like this, or in terms of getting advice from people like us, we have seen that go from maybe 5% of your classroom to like up to 35%, and suddenly it's actually got to be front and center, right? So because of that increase in EHCPs, because of that increase in other diagnosed special educational needs, and again, you guys have pointed out the undiagnosed needs that teachers are always aware of. When you get that feeling, it's like, something's going on. You're not sure what it is, but something's going on. So in that new context, using stuff like this is really important. So how do we make sure that inclusivity is not a sideshow, that it is the main part of what we do as teachers? How do we start to do that, do you think?
So originally, when we had it's using things, I found that using things for inclusivity, actually for the children that it was meant for, it actually really helps a whole raft of children, like Immersive Reader, like the text going across the top. It's actually been really useful for all children. because it caters for all different learning styles. And like one of the key things that we've spoken about before is EHC plans are up here, staffing is down here. So I've got less staff now than I had 3-4 years ago.
By staff, do you mean like teaching assistants, learning assistants?
Yeah.
Okay.
So our learning support assistants are now TAs, which means they can now be put between classes and now shared.
Yeah.
And so any technology we can use to help, because our job is harder and getting harder and harder, and I can't say much of a change anytime soon. Using the technology that's there, but people like Thomas, people like you, it's learning from other teachers to know that there is things there to help us, like AI that you mentioned before. Some people go, AI, I don't like technology, I'm just not going to look at it. However, just have a look at it and see what it can do for you, because it's not like the be and end all, it's a tool, it's not the fix, it's a tool to help you. And that's, I learn all the time. I'm walking around thinking, like before the NAN project, I will tonight be writing that down and I'll be looking at that this weekend, ready to use for my kids. So it's something that we've said today, I could be using in my class next week to help my students, my children understand something, but also develop myself as a teacher.
And I think it's really important what you said with AI, because I feel like when you walk around some of these times, you will hear AI over and over again, but it's understanding and unpicking what is available and how it applies to your class. But at the same time, going back to some of the things that are simple. Like one of the things that I love that you did recently was you showcased how you have a layout of your class and you can plan using my viewboard how to set your class out, and it's planning around those needs that you have. So going back to some of the basics, yes, AI is available, but also thinking about some of those basics. And when you were talking about how do we support children because those needs are really growing, it's almost thinking about them first nowadays, putting them first, and then planning around those children. Because yes, we want to pitch to the top and we want them to achieve extremely high, but planning around them to make sure that we've got those accessibility things in place so that the children can access those. Because like you've done, having children, whether it's at the front with those hearing needs, I think that's really important so that we take a step back and think, okay, what is available? But also thinking about some of the old school things that we would have learned at university that we perhaps have forgotten about because we're so hyped up about AI. And I can sit and sell AI, but at the end of the day, we do need to sometimes take a step back and think about what the specific needs of the child is, getting to know the child and going from there.
Professionals are still the best way to fulfill the needs, absolutely. I mean, I know there are people who are saying, well, AI might replace teachers. I don't think AI will ever replace teachers. And because teaching is about human relationships at the end of the day, it's not just about a transfer of knowledge, is it? And to be able to know how to transfer best, you have to know the human beings in your room. In terms of crossover strategies for SEND and EAL, what do you guys, I mean, does anything come to mind in terms of crossover strategies that might help both types of needs? And we're talking learning and language needs, so they are different, but there are some things that can help both of them.
There's a resource. I know it was quite interesting. We were having a talk before this. You're a Latin American specialist, journalist, etc. I've recently been to South America for my honeymoon, traveling around, and I felt like an EAL child. Lots of people were speaking at me rather than to me, and I kind of felt like, okay, I kind of get it. I get what it's like to be an EAL learner. You've got all these signs around you looking, you're going like, I just want to try and find a supermarket, you know? You tell me straight away what that word is now. So I find myself utilizing a range of different resources to try and just help me out. One of them was, one of the really big tools was something called Say Hi. Now, Say Hi is language specific, but it allows you to kind of break down some of those conversations. And if you've got an SEND needs in your class and EAL, you can have those resources if you've got an iPad. So Say Hi, you'd be able to talk into the app, and then that conversation is tracked. Yes, for the child who has that EAL need, it would be translated, but as you're having that conversation, that transcript starts to come up and that can be played back. So you
it can be played as in terms of a sound.
As a sound.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can imagine talking buttons. We would use these talking tins back in the days.
Yes.
8 years ago when I came into the classroom, we'd have these talking tins. They're unreliable. Do you remember them, yeah? You poke them, you poke them and they'd work for 30 seconds and you're shaking the thing because it's run out of battery and the kids have tapped it and they're like, oh, I've forgotten what that thing is. Can you record it? And you find yourself going back. But now you've got those apps that are available where you can talk into it and it'll track what's being said. So yes, you can translate to other languages and that's great because they can translate to you. But just having that narrative log written down is great because then children can see that and they go, what did Sir say? Oh, okay. And they're able to see those things, that narrative that you've already had as you're going around and giving them that 30 seconds of precious time.
Anything from you, Simon, in terms of crossover SEND and EAL strategies?
So with inclusivity, for example, so the main barrier that I find with staff and teachers is because it's technology based, some people just put a wall up like this and say, oh, technology is not my thing. And then I remember showing a really amazing resource. I think it was on, because we've got ViewSonic boards on our screen, do you know when you can export your slides with a QR code and you can give it to an individual child that can zoom in? I remember showing a teacher this, I won't say her name, but yeah. And I said, we could use this lesson, and we were talking about growth mindset. We're doing a growth mindset lesson, and I was showing how to use this to export her growth mindset lessons. And she said, no, I don't like that. I'm just going to stick to my PowerPoint. And I'm like, you're literally teaching about growth mindset, but you won't change your mindset, but you expect children to change your mindset. And what's really interesting, because my children are 7-year-olds, every so often when I'm introducing a website or ChatGPT or whatever it may be, I get some of my children to co-present the staff meeting for me. So I get 7-year-olds. So for example, the White Rose have something called Infinity Maths, which is a really great tool for a repetition of maths. So I knew that I might get a bit of a barrier with this with teachers going, oh, that's iPad based, that's not maths. Well, there's lots of things that's really good for children. So I started off this was last Tuesday. I started off the staff meeting and I said, right, so this is Infinity Maths. I explained the theory behind it, and I said, I'm just going to get some demonstrations. And I had these little 7-year-olds walking in, and I said, it's really easy, miss. All you got to do is you do this, scan it like this, look. And then they said, oh, why does it help you? Well, because sometimes when we finish our maths, we just need to practice a little bit more. And this website helps us practice. It's very visual as well, so you've got lots of manipulatives on there.
Sorry, this is your 7-year-old.
This is my 7-year-old. And I stood there and then like, so there's no reason why as teachers we should then not go away. And children learn through play, but so do adults. And you do lots of training. I feel like if I put, and you've probably done the same, Thomas, if I explained an app, if I left an iPad on a table and there was an app that I wanted staff to use, I said, there's an app there, I'm just going to go get a coffee, I'll be back in 10 minutes. When I get back, so many times the teachers will still be sat around waiting for me to explain how to use the app. If I had a class full of children, I was 7-year-olds, I said, right guys, there's an app there, I'm going to explain how to use it. I'll be back in a bit. When I get back, I guarantee they'll be all playing with it and they would have figured the majority of the app out by themselves. And that's learning through play. And as teachers, we just need to give it a go and learn through play.
So this comes back to our original point, which is that how the brain acquires language is socially. That is one of the reasons why I think a lot of our children had real difficulties with the lack of schooling under lockdown. Not that they weren't interacting with people, but they weren't necessarily interacting in a way that made them have to use explicit language, that made them have to explain things. Language tends to become contracted when you're both looking at the same thing, because it's it, and you're pointing, and you understand each other without actually having to use the vocabulary. And so language can contract under those conditions. The best way to expand language, both for our SEND and EAL kids, is again to give them a visual, to get them involved in something, and then to give them the language that goes along with that. Teachers have to learn about the number of bits of instructional language that they use. If they have a picture or an action that goes with that, those kids will get those gulps of language, and they'll be able to then build upon that. So that's one of the reasons why it's really important to have those sorts of things to allow you to show visually or physically what it is you're doing, to have other kids show other kids, etc. Teachers, students teaching teachers is, very useful. But those sorts of crossover strategies really help. Anything that gets beyond the brain's processing, where it has to pull together a visual with language. Anyway, so moving on to the last bit in terms of focusing on students with SEND. Both from your experience, what does a truly inclusive school look like in practice? And a more important question, perhaps, is how do we move beyond simply offering support to a system that fundamentally welcomes and celebrates neurodiversity and varied learning needs?
That's a deep question.
Have
we got another panel?
We're getting to the deep part. We're definitely getting to the deep part.
Okay, so yeah, we could talk about this for another half an hour. I think my final kind of quick win to kind of summarize exactly, because it's such a deep, complicated question. for me would be to kind of take a step back and get to know the children. I think at the start of every single year, you get given your data, your sheets, and you have those transition meetings. And I don't know about you, I've had meetings in the past where I've been given the children, and I come away thinking I'm scared. I'm like, oh no, next year's going to be absolute chaos. But then you have the summer holidays, you start to relax a little bit, and then you come back, and those children that you've heard about and seen on paper, you might have seen them wandering around the corridors, are completely different to what you get to know. So like you said at the start, it's about trying to develop that relationship initially, but also getting to know them yourself. Yes, those EHCPs will be available, but you will have strategies as an experienced teacher, SEND consultant, teacher myself, where you're thinking, okay, this has worked, we're going to try this, but also get to know the child and think about things that perhaps would work for myself. And as that relationship starts to continue, you'll be able to develop that understanding of what the child needs. And hopefully, I mean, it's a small part of a very big question, but I think that getting to know the children on a personal level, not just a paper level, is crucial too.
Yeah, so I've said this before. I remember when I first started year 6, I was worried about teaching in year 6. Is it working? Yeah. I was worried about teaching in year 6, and I remember the other year 6 teacher said, "Don't smile till Christmas." That is the worst advice. You smile from the second the children walk in to show that you're a person, and those relations. The hardest part of my job. I always feel the hardest part of my job is around about July. I spend so much time with my children, and then I've got to go. Okay, off you go. Next class. And then I'm a mess on the last day, honestly. When the children are crying when they go home, I'm home like, oh my gosh. And then when it comes to September, I go, what do I do the first week? What lesson do I teach? I think, and then when I go to school, some of the children, when they come to my class, they're nervous. They've been off for 6 weeks. And remember, when you're a child, 6 weeks is like 6 years. And they've been off for so long. And they come into school, and I talk to them. I say, you know what, I've been really nervous coming back to school today. I've been off for so long. Have a conversation. Let's build those relationships. And it's all about relationships. Yeah, every July, I'm a mess. It's July 21st this year. So yeah, I'm not doing anything that night. But it's because of those relationships, because of those feelings that you get. That those are what make you as a teacher, make you as a practitioner, and it also helps the children as well. And when you see those relationships grow, when you see a child that's maybe struggled in school before and they now settle and they're happy, the feeling you get when you see that, it's magical. And that's the magic of teaching. When you see a child happy in school that maybe struggled before, or you see that moment that they get a concept that for years they thought, I could never do that, and then you all of a sudden get it, and you helped with that. It's such a magical thing. All the other thing is always going to be difficult, but it's those little sprinkles of magic are the reason why I still love being a teacher, and the reason why I miss my kids this week. I've not seen them all week, and I'll see them next week, and they'll be like, Mr. Hunt, what did you do? What shows the things? Oh, I did this, did this. Oh, what gear did you get? Is always after free stuff. Did you get some glue sticks this time? Like, yes, I did. What about whiteboard pens? Well, I'm not a miracle maker, but it's just all about those relationships as well. But yeah, I love being a teacher. It's the best job ever.
So it sounds like celebrating neurodiversity and inclusivity is about just celebrating people.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if we do that enough in education. Certainly, as someone who's a secondary school specialist, it's a lot about the curriculum and not necessarily about the individuals that are in their classes. And I mean, you know, as a MFL teacher, someone who taught Spanish, who still teaches Spanish, I may have been able to see the children 3 times over 2 weeks. If you're an English teacher, you might see that child 4 times a week. So there are some subjects that are able to build better relationships with their kids because they just see them a bit more often. They see them more as people. In terms of neurodiversity, I think, first of all, people are not quite sure what neurodiversity is. It is a number of things. It's different types of specific learning difficulties. It's autism and all autism-related disorders. It's ADHD and those children that have attention deficit with and without hyperactivity. There's a lot of neurodiversity out there. But when we know those children as individuals, you find that wiggle room for them between the curriculum and the behavior policy. And I'm not sure if you deal so much in behavior policies in primary schools, but certainly in secondary schools, because we have so much curriculum. New teachers in particular are supported by behavior policies. Those of us that are a bit long in the tooth know that our behavior policy in our classroom is supported by the relationships with the students. But I will say one thing. I think that schools don't do enough about awareness days. I don't think they do enough about celebrating Autism Awareness Week, which is coming up in April. They don't do enough of supporting, Dyslexia Week, which is in October. They don't do enough of that because that kind of visibility, learning from other campaigns. I mean, the whole reason that we know about different genders and having awareness around that is because that's been a hugely visible campaign where that visibility exists, that ability to develop better relationships where children feel accepted in all of their parts, and also staff. We have a lot more staff who are neurodiverse themselves, who are transgender, etc. It's all about we're all here, we're all normal, right? So that's part of, I think, building relationships is a big one. Do you guys have awareness days at your schools? Do you do assemblies and do you have speakers come in or posters or whatever it is?
Yeah, we do have days sometimes, but I sometimes feel like Internet Safety Day. I always remember eSafety Day was a day where some schools scare children for a full day, and then that's it, to try to scare children away from the internet. But it's actually, let's celebrate all the positive. There's positives and negative things for everything. Yes, we need to look at the negative things to do with the internet, but we also need to look at all the positive things. And I think sometimes we need more. We do, and for children as well to feel valued and sort of noticed and seen. And for other children to maybe, they might have heard the word autism before, but maybe have no concept of what that means. And by explaining what autism is and explaining that it's different needs, we just all just learn in different ways. It helps children understand what that means, but also children with autism that are sat in the class that feel represented. It's about that representation.
Absolutely. How about you?
And that representation matters. I think one of the big things about being in a big international school in the UAE, we had 8 form schools, 8 classes in every year group, which is mad for a primary. Some schools are 14, but what that allows is there's lots of different needs and the department to support with that. But what we had was a specific assembly where children were able to stand up in front of an auditorium that would be very similar to the BETT Arena and kind of stand, perhaps not that size. Now, I'm just thinking about what it was like yesterday. It's not that size. But they had an amazing auditorium. And they would stand up in front of all these people. You can imagine those needs. And they were able to say, they were able to champion their needs and educate other people about some of the struggles that they have so that other children are aware that they're not just different, okay? It's some of the challenges that they might face. And then other children are like, oh, okay, I can relate to that a little bit. I struggle with this, okay, I don't have that same need. But it's making them feel less of an alien in an environment where it's important for them to be, as we say here, inclusive. And does that job of promoting inclusivity 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there was 10 years ago, it was all about disability and accepting disabled people, having children in wheelchairs in classrooms. And that seemed like a very big deal. Everything that first seems like new seems like a big deal, and we kind of all get used to it, don't we? I mean, we are human beings, we do adapt. So we're going to start to wrap up now. And I think looking at a conclusion, if you could change, looking ahead, if you could change one fundamental aspect of the educational system to promote inclusivity on a systemic level, what would it be and why?
For me, it would be the nationalized EHC. Like, I went to Norway a couple of years ago, and they have just a national system, and it's clear from the top of Norway all the way down the exact process, and that's how I would change it, as well as funding. But there you go, that's a whole.
How about you, Thomas?
Can I say more staff? Can I just throw out more staff and we just find magic money from somewhere? I think what's nice to see the difference in staffing in the UAE and things like that is you've got that availability of resources to pull from. So I think it is one, if you're asking, how to change the system, it's having that support available. But like you said, that increased awareness of how to support those needs through education, through training, to make sure that we're able to support all children, not just one or two in a specific way. It's just having these types of conversations too, I think is really important, because when we have these types of conversations about things that are working for all of us, I think it allows us all to benefit.
Lovely. Okay, so we're going to wrap up with one last question. So what's one piece of advice that you would give new teachers who are just beginning to focus on inclusivity and SEN support in their classes, either new or old? One piece of advice to support inclusivity. What do you think?
I think I don't know if I'm allowed to go back to an original point that I made. Going back, take a step back. Taking that opportunity to kind of know the children first before just reading the paper. Know the children on a personal level, not just on a paper level. Once you do that, you'll know what those needs are. You can map, like you've said, about having a dynamic way of getting around the classroom to make sure that you've got those plans in place. But once you know those specific needs, you'll start to be able to communicate with other teachers about things that they do in their classroom to support children of perhaps similar needs. It might even be that, you know, Simon and I talk, and we're like, you've got a child who's struggling with something like EAL needs in a specific language. You've got those resources already available. And I've got some things that are available for children with dyslexia. And you can actually, you know, you talk to people and you realize, oh, we can support one another.
Communication, the community of teachers. Ultimately, this whole place, this huge multi-million-pound building with all these stuff, we're all here to help children. That's what it's here for. And collaborate, listen. Like I said, I'm going to use things that you've mentioned today. Next week, I wish I could go back to my NQT self and just tell myself that you don't need to know everything from day one, because nobody does. And it's a constant learning, evolving job. Because I remember starting my job, it was such a huge pressure starting in my first class thinking, gosh, I need to know everything. But you don't, you learn, and you just learn and develop and just learn by talking to people and building relationships.
Well, I suppose if I were to give one piece of advice, it's difficult for me to give one piece of advice, but I think that teachers should learn from their students in the sense that when you have built a relationship with a child and you have figured out what works with that child, I think what a lot of new teachers think is that, well, that's just that kid. What you should be doing as a professional is developing typologies in your head. So you think, well, that helped that kid, maybe it'll help the next kid, and you start to develop your own toolkit. You definitely go for those pieces of advice and talk to other members of staff and talk to the SENCO and talk to everybody else you can and do your own research. But the most powerful thing is when you have, again, when you start to have this kind of like group of kids in your head. There was that kid that was in year 9 when I first started. That was that kid that was in year 11. And you just start to think about what can I take from those children and apply to children who seem very much like them? Because you are just trying to develop a toolkit under your skin that you can just pull out when you think, okay. And when you meet a new type of child, you think, I haven't had that before. Start to develop some, just, you know, do some experimenting, and then take those learning from those children. As teachers, we learn the most from our students, and I think that we kind of forget that sometimes because we have so many other things to learn. So I think we're going to wrap it up now. Thank you so much to our panelists for talking. Thank you to Simon. Thank you to Thomas for sharing your experience and your wisdom and your guidance. I'm sure your year 3 class is going to be happy to see you. What do you teach these days?
So I teach year people. We're doing a live Zoom tomorrow with them.
All right.
Zoom my class tomorrow. But yeah, I'm on here later on.
And Simon,
so you'll be going back. Thomas, what will you be going back to, you think?
I will be going back to creating videos. So I'll be going back
more
to
EdTech resources,
EdTech resources, things like that, where I'll try and share that on my platforms, Thomas Blakemore,
right,
through YouTube. Simon, where can people find you, Laura?
Great. Well, tomorrow I'll be going back to my work around developing autism units, training teachers, working across my 33 secondary schools, and trying to make things better for SEND and EAL children. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. This was us from ViewSonic. Take care.
Thank you.